Hi guys, so today I'm going to be going through how to make a gold feminism revision card for your upcoming English literature exams. You are going to need for this tutorial a cue card, a pen and a highlighter. This tutorial will talk primarily about Romeo and Juliet and how the concept of feminism fits into that particular literature text. However, towards the end of the video, I will be going through how the ideas discussed in this tutorial can be conveyed through your other literature texts. First things first, we need to establish what feminism is. So, broken down into basic terms, feminism is the belief that the sexes should have equal opportunity and treatment. So let's start thinking about how this applies to Romeo and Juliet. First of all, we need to understand that 16th century England was androcentric. Now, if you're not sure what androcentric means, it simply means male-centred. Andro meaning male and centric obviously meaning centred. Okay, so can we highlight this keyword, because this is going to be something we need to remember. This is part of our gold vocabulary that we need to be trying to insert into our exam answers. And because Elizabethan society was so androcentric, it meant that society itself was inherently misogynistic. Just jotting that down. Again, if we're not sure what misogynistic means, okay, it essentially means treatment that is cruel, unfair, or inhumane towards women. Okay, and we need to understand that in the 16th century, this was generally how society operated. Women were seen as second-class citizens, and they were seen as inferior to men. Next, women had little agency or power. When we talk about agency, what we mean is the ability to have choice, the ability to have freedom. Okay, so women lacked that kind of basic choice and power in their lives. They were mainly figures of objectification. Now, if we're not sure what objectification means, that simply means that they were regarded in terms of their sexuality, in terms of their physical attractiveness, in terms of their beauty. Okay, so they were often seen as useful for their sexual identity, useful for their beauty, or useful for their abilities to produce as mothers. Okay, and they were also subservient. They were figures of objectification and subservience. Now, if we're not sure what subservience means, that simply means that they were inferior and were expected to bow down to men. They were expected to be servants to men. They were expected to follow all the rules and regulations that the androcentric society placed for women. Okay, so we need to highlight a couple of key words here, a couple of gold words. So we've got agency, which again, reminder, means choice. Objectification, so marking someone out in terms of their sexuality or femininity. And subservience, this idea that they are inferior to men. So thinking, to move to the middle a little bit, so thinking about how this applies to the play. So obviously we've got this idea of Samson and Gregory at the beginning of the play are overtly misogynistic with the way that they talk about women, the way that they talk about their desire to be aggressive in a sexual nature towards women, to cut off their maiden heads, the way they are bragging about their masculinity and being overtly violent and aggressive whenever talking about women. But one of the key things that Shakespeare reveals in Romeo and Juliet is the character of Juliet. Now, she is really important. She is not a typical 16th century woman. She may seem like that at the beginning of the play, when in Act 1, Scene 3, she is talking to her mother and she's very subservient, she's very formal. However, as the play develops, she is known as a transgression. She transgresses from normal representations of femininity. So, this is what we're going to write. Juliet represents a transgression, which means going against what is expected. from normative, meaning expected, representations of femininity. So, in simple terms, she does not act like a typical Elizabethan woman, okay? She is headstrong. She defies her father. She defies expectations placed on her gender, okay? She is demanding. She knows what she wants. So therefore, she represents a transgression from normative representation of femininity. When you are studying scenes that show Juliet being forceful, being opinionated, taking charge of her identity, then you need to be saying in your exam that she represents a transgression. Okay, so we're just going to highlight those key words. So transgression, meaning a departure from what society dictates. Normative, meaning expected. And femininity, meaning female-like. Okay? However, ultimately, what happens to Juliet as a result of this behaviour? She dies. Okay, so we can see that as Shakespeare implying that she is punished for this. She is punished for her transgressive behaviour. This begs the question, okay, does Shakespeare mean this? Does he want her to be seen as a figure of warning, a figure of ladies, don't be transgressive in the 16th century, look what happens to you? Or was Shakespeare a progressive? Was he championing the rights of women? Was Shakespeare an Elizabethan feminist? I maybe wouldn't go that far, but we could question, was Shakespeare a progressive? This would be a lovely argument to put into your essays, particularly if you're looking at anything to do with Juliet, gender, power roles, femininity, the treatment of women, okay, because progressive means forward thinking, and if we could argue that Shakespeare writes Romeo and Juliet to present a forward thinking perception of the way that women are treated within society, okay, that would be a really powerful argument. So we'll just highlight progressive because this is another one of our gold words here. So now that we've outlined the key knowledge relating to feminism in our gold revision, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other texts that you need to study for your English literature exam and how these ideas that are primarily based around Romeo and Juliet for this tutorial, how they can link to other literature texts. So, Blood Brothers. Okay, Mrs. Lyons. Now she is confined to a typical female role. Okay, she stays in the house, she does not work, she relies on her husband for monetary support. Okay, and ultimately from this she descends into madness. So perhaps Russell is making a point here, similar to Shakespeare. Okay, obviously Russell was writing much more recently than Shakespeare, but perhaps Russell is making a point about the way that society treats women. Okay, if you confine women, if you limit their agency, then they are going to be destroyed by this. They are going to figuratively descend to madness. Perhaps Russell is making the point that treating women in this way is damaging. It's always good to pose a question within your exams, and this could be a really interesting question that you could pose. Keeping with Blood Brothers, what about Linda? Okay, she is destroyed by an androcentric society, okay? The Linda of Act 1 of the play is vivacious, she's confident, she is headstrong. The Linda of Act 2, when she's been beaten down by this androcentrism, by becoming pregnant, by having to marry, okay, by having to care for Mickey in his difficult circumstances, she is destroyed, she is a shadow of her former self, okay? And finally, using one of the poems as an example. So if we look at My Last Duchess, by Robert Browning. Okay, the narrator of the poem, the character that Browning creates, the Duke, okay, he is deeply misogynistic. He talks about how his wife defies him and does not conform to the expectations he has upon her, and the inference is that he destroys her, he has her killed. Therefore, the character is deeply misogynistic. So see how I'm using all of this gold vocabulary, okay, to kind of make sure that my ideas are linked to the gold knowledge. So we've got confined, we've got androcentric, and we've got misogynistic. Okay. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've learned a little bit more about feminism and how it can relate to the literature text that you are studying. If you've got any questions, please speak to your teachers. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.